good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Ron Bro, CEO and President of TopStep. I'm happy to be here today to present our latest series in our webinar series. Today, our topic is project budget management and earned value and reports. So we will jump into that shortly. Okay, so for today, we're really going to focus on project management and really how to use OpenAir as an earned value system. So when I say earned value, I know that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but generally what we see from our customers that are striving to report on earned value, it's really about being able to see how much work have we done on a project versus how much work is expected of us, and being able to use that to determine if we're in good shape or are there problems we need to address. And really it's meant to be kind of a warning signal if the project is not going well, and helping us to take action ahead of schedule. So there's some different native options in OpenAir, and then there's some custom options that we'll talk through on today's session. So in order to report on anything and earn value from an OpenAir perspective, you've got to have a level of project management, and some project management elements are required for earned value. So you've got to be able to have budgets in the system, and there's in OpenAir there's many ways to add budgets, and we'll talk about the different options and which budget options work and which ones do but don't work, but there might be ways to make them work. The other element you've got to have is you've got to have a set of task activities within a project. So what are we going to accomplish? There's got to be some level. It doesn't have to be extremely granular. It can be very simple, but there does have to be a level of task activities. And then you've got to have not only hours budget, but dollars budget as part of the project as well. And so being able to not only track our hours, but our dollars as we go through a budget. So those are kind of the key aspects of OpenAir project management that does, allow you to get into some earned value metrics. When we talk about reporting on hours budgets, there are different levels of budgeting in OpenAir, and we'll say from a basic level, you can just add a set of budgeted hours at a project. And so many customers will use this, but they'll use this in conjunction with some of the other methods. If you're doing budgeted hours at a project only, then that's we would say is the easiest, simplest way to store a budget. You can also set up projects to have tasks, and each task has a budget. And so you can say we have a project budget, but then each task has its own budget, and that rolls up to an overall budget for the project. And then the most complex, we'll say, or advanced that we see is being able to budget down to a person to a task. So on a task, we may have 4 folks assigned to do work. Each person has an own individual budget. Those individual budgets roll up to an overall task budget. Task budgets roll up to an overall project budget. So, within those 3 different settings, you can get various granularity around different earned value reporting in the system. In conjunction with the budgeting hours, there are a couple of other elements that we'll talk about. Baselines, so being able to capture those budgets at the start of the project and being able to refer back to them. So baseline for the planned hours, or baseline for the assigned hours per resource are capturable using a baseline feature. And that could be very valuable as you navigate your project. There's also a feature called Project Budget, which we'll get into in more detail in later slides. It's a newer feature within the last couple of years, and there's definitely some benefits to using that feature to do your project planning. So again, we'll go into that shortly. Another component of earned value is not just how many hours do we have and how many dollars do we have, but what's our time frame to complete this project. And in order to really get earned value, you have to have a time frame represented in OpenAir. Now, there are definitely multiple ways to represent a time frame, and depending on which way you would set your system up will depend on whether you have the ability to use some of the standard out of the box earned value reporting, or you'll need to create custom earned value reporting metrics. So some tips that we see customers benefiting from is using templates to set up your projects, and within those templates you could have a baked in project task structure, and that really can give you a head start to getting that project plan, project schedule, if you're using your task structure to drive your project schedule. And we'll talk a little bit about more details there. You have the option in project plans to set predecessors. And when I think of predecessors and task structure, I do think of project, Microsoft Project, probably the most popular tool out there. Think of OpenAir can mimic some of what Microsoft Project does in those cases, but be careful. We try to direct customers to really use OpenAir as is not quite the level of detail that you normally would see in a large project plan, but enough level of detail to be able to capture what needs to be where time needs to be captured and what deliverables need to be delivered. You have options within your task to be able to enable what's called an end date on a task. And so generally out of the box, there's a start date on a task, and then the start date would calculate a finish date based on the number of hours and the allocation of the resources on a project task. You can actually go ahead and have an end date as well, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and how that gets enabled. And then managing start and end dates, should you go down that route, we recommend the worksheet view for that. And that is basically like a spreadsheet view of your project task structure. And it's able to basically be able to bulk manage those start and end dates, so that you're not drilling task by task into the worksheet, the tasks themselves. Now, many folks use resource scheduling to drive their schedule and not the project task structure. And that's obviously a very acceptable way to use OpenAir, and use bookings to drive the schedule of the project. And certainly, we can use that to still get earned value, but it would require more of customized reporting, some custom calculations that will need to be created to be able to use those and get the same sort of reporting values out of the system. Sorry, skipped too far. So I mentioned predecessors. OpenAir does give you the ability to set predecessors, and there is a Gantt view that allows a drag and drop capability, and being able to add and remove predecessor relationships within a project task structure. So you'll see the screenshot here. If you're looking for this functionality and you don't see it in your OpenAir system, then I would look to see if there is a setting of some switches that do need to be turned on for this feature, so you can check suite answers. And so basically the benefit of using predecessors is you being able to adjust one task and having that task kind of ripple through and push other tasks and milestones out. So if there's a milestone delay that will delay the rest of the project, you're able to just set the one delay and have that ripple down. And so that's the benefit. There's some downside to predecessors. You have to make sure that the predecessors are managed, that you are you're having to set those up. They are they can be a little complicated with start to finish between tasks and dependencies. So you have to be really thoughtful as you enable those in your project plan. And the other option is actually managing the start and end dates. So the one thing to keep in mind is predecessor relationships and managing start and end dates are mutually exclusive. So once you put a date on a task, even if you have predecessors enabled in your project task structure, you are not able to manage, the predecessors no longer work. So it does override that. So you will be kind of forced to manage those end dates and start dates. And what I mentioned earlier about an end date is OpenAir has a start date and a finish date that is calculated. You can add an end date if you don't have one. It is a setting that you have to request that requires a custom field on the task. But the benefit is being able to, instead of managing the percentage and the hours, you can actually manage the start and the end date on the task, and then that will automatically calculate the hours and the percentage for task assignments. So it does make managing dates much more simple. And the task worksheet, again, is an efficient way to go through your project and manage those dates. And the worksheet is enabled at a stage level. So if you don't see the worksheet, you might want to check your project stage and make sure it is checked to show for those stages. And you can do also predecessors for automatic calculation of dates as well, is another option, as we talked about earlier. So another feature that does give you the ability to derive earned value metrics is what's OpenAir called project budgets. So project budgets are basically the ability to create a time-based cost budget. So it really was derived for advanced costing of your project plan. So what are the cost values that you'd want to track, and what is the time period to which those cost values are expected to be burned? So if you think of the different costs that customers incur within a project, there's the labor costs, obviously, but then you also have expense costs. And if you're using the purchasing module in OpenAir, you could have purchasing costs. So you can have all of those different costs in the system and then be able to go in your project budget and be able to align those. Now, project budget can be set at multiple levels. So you can budget at a project level, a phase level, or a task level. So you have that when you set your project budget up, you will have the ability to select. Once you do select, be aware that it gets locked in, and you would have to change it. You would have to delete the budget and recreate it to get a new basis for your budget. So what this budget looks like is basically allows you to go in and choose different labor categories. In this case, you can set it by service, or you can set it up by job code, and then be able to enter the hours across different periods. So you can set this up for monthly or weekly or quarterly. And then the hours will generate a cost based on the job code costs, or based on the job code rates, user costs in the system. And that will derive your cost budget. You can also bring in the cost from task assignments. You can also bring in the cost from your bookings as well. So if you are using bookings in OpenAir to basis of your scheduling, you could still use this budgeting feature to bring in the cost from those bookings and be able to then capture those costs for reporting values. The other good thing about this budget feature is when you turn it on, it creates a number of new reporting values. So all the values you see in this budget feature are now available to be reported on in the reporting engine. So that can add a lot of new powerful metrics and KPIs that you can start to build on inside of OpenAir. You'll see here in this screenshot, you can set your initial costs, you can set your initial period values, and it does allow inline editing. So as you're modifying the costs or you're updating your costs, you can go in and inline edit those across multiple months, and that will and that's very user friendly, being able to edit those costs and control what periods you think they're going to hit, and and can be very beneficial. Once you set your costs up and you can determine, what's the basis of your actuals. Generally, you can set those to be approved, submitted, or all hours and costs. So, for example, you can now start to see, your actuals. So you can see your planned, your actuals, and then you can see month over month, which has been how are you tracking cost-wise versus your planned hours. So you can get, again, you can get earned value here. You can also get estimate to complete, as well as estimate at complete, are all features of this budget feature. The ETC and EAC options were added at a later state. So if you are looking to enable the project budget feature, make sure you also may want to ask for the EAC and ETC features as well to be added onto that. And that, again, can be very powerful in reporting. So a lot of people get confused between project budgets and task and the regular budget features. So to be clear, the project budget is a granular budgeting feature, and it does give you the ability to budget across time periods. And generally, it was derived to be used for cost. But what we found with many customers over the years is this is a pretty flexible item. So for example, let's say you wanted to use it as a revenue budget for your practice, and you have a revenue project that you want to create and track that, and that bringing that, creating a custom calc around those revenue budgets per month, comparing those to actual revenue for all of your other projects. This is a great way to be able to create those revenue budgets by just repurposing this feature. And we've seen it a few other ways used. We've seen it where customers wanted to copy bookings from a period and kind of store them as sort of a baseline, so they could compare the bookings from the past to what the bookings are currently to see how they've changed. We've written some scripts here at TopStep for customers to be able to do that sort of storage of the bookings by period data into the budget table, to be able to then report against and be able to see some of those nuances. So that could be a very powerful tool. Now, not to be confused with the more out-of-the-box budget option, which is now called transactional budget, which is really meant to track just the revenue dollars associated with a project. And so, they also, the benefit of that transactional budget is to be able to have multiple budgets. And we see this a lot where the customer may have a labor budget from a revenue perspective, or an expense budget as well, but also being able to track if change orders come in. So if I start off with a budget of, let's say, $50,000, and a customer comes back and gives me a $10,000 change order, now instead of overriding a budget to say 60, I can now layer budgets on top of each other with dates and descriptions, and be able to see now on the project budget, I can see 60, but under the covers, I can see where this was made up from multiple budgets, and report against those multiple budgets as well, and use those in custom calculations as well. So the transactional budget feature is actually, it's a great feature. We generally do recommend it for our customers, and it works in conjunction with the project budget feature. So it's very common where customers will use both features to be able to get the required reporting out of the system that they're looking for. Oops. So in addition to some of the features we've been talking about, there is actually a feature that was released, I believe in 2007 or 8, which is earned value management. And this is actually kind of best practice for project management. And it really uses the basis of what we've been talking about. It uses the effort schedule based on the project task structure and the dates within the task. And it also uses the cost of the resources and the hours associated with those resources. And it derives from that several key metrics that can be very beneficial as you monitor your projects. And all of this is really meant to be able to give you kind of an advanced warning if your project is off the rails in one way or another. So, the two metrics that most commonly are reported on is what's called the SPI, which is the Schedule Performance Index. And this is a calculation of earned value over planned value. And we'll talk about what those calculations mean on the next couple of slides. And then there is what's called the CPI, which is the Cost Performance Index. And what does either of those mean to me? Well, to keep it simple, and I try to keep everything in simple terms, what the SPI refers to is, are we on schedule to deliver the project based on how the project plan is set up? What the CPI says is, are we over or under the cost performance that we've estimated to deliver the project, right? So you could throw a lot of resources at a project. You could be really good on the schedule, but you could be really bad on your costs. So the CPI and the SPI will give you the different values based on how the project is progressing. And so the goal is to get them close to 1, from 1 being the ideal number. And anything less than 1 means you are over budget of cost. So you're over your cost of your resources is above what was planned. Anything less than 1 from an SPI means you are behind the schedule to which you were expecting. And obviously, over 1 requires that you have not spent as much money on cost to deliver the project, or you are ahead of schedule, delivering where you thought you'd be at this point in time. So that's really where those two KPIs are really valuable, and quickly being able to see, am I under 1, am I over 1, how close am I to 1, and do I need to make adjustments to my project plan? So EVM is actually one of those features that you probably never noticed, but it is available in your other settings within the project settings, and it's way at the bottom of the form, and it's something you can enable yourself. And again, you just check the box. It does not affect any other parts of the product. It really just, what it does is it creates a lot of new reporting values and a lot of new list view values. So after you enable this feature, if you go back to your list view and sort your view, you'll notice that you see a lot of different values that are now available. So it does do that. So you just need to take that into effect, make sure you understand what you're trying to get out of it. And then you also can determine what cost am I going to have my EVM based on. So as we mentioned, cost is a critical element in being able to report. And so being able to determine which of the costs on a user is something you'll need to set. As everyone knows, I'm sure you can have multiple costs for different purposes in OpenAir at a user level. So choosing the right cost will help you. Obviously, to use EVM, this out-of-the-box version, you have to have the task schedules. You have to have user costs. You have to plan hours over time. And then you have to be entering time in a relatively timely manner. So all of these are key elements for being able to actually get the EVM to give you the data output you're looking for. So if we go back to the definitions of EVM and the key critical components, planned value is the number of hours times the cost. And planned value is a point in time. So what is my planned value as of today for my project? Earned value is how much percentage of planned work's been completed by the budgeted cost at completion. So how much have we done versus how much is expected to be done by the end of the project. That's going to give you your plan, your earned value of the project. And then your actual cost is your what's been worked over user cost. So the combination of these three values are what derive your SPI values. So your SPI becomes your earned value over your planned value, and your CPI becomes your earned value over your actual costs. And again, the ideal is being able to get as close to one out of those as you can. So in OpenAir terminology, simple enough, right? But from an OpenAir perspective, it's looking at the number of hours assigned to users on a task over the user's cost. I'm sorry, multiplied by the user's cost. And again, that's as of today. And the earned value is the percent complete of the task multiplied by the total cost of the assigned hours. So those are how OpenAir determines planned value, earned value, and then the actual cost is just the timesheet hours by the user cost. So if you're including, it's good to know what the underlying calculations are for these key elements and how they work together to create the different SPI, CPI. It's because if you can't use the out-of-the-box version, then you may be able to replicate these calculations using some of the other available options in OpenAir. So as I mentioned earlier, once you turn EVM on and you look at your project list or your outline view within your projects, you'll now see lots of new options. So you can see here we've got our earned value, our actual costs, planned value, all become available here, our CPI and our SPI. And then there's another value that is pretty widely used as well, what's called the critical ratio. And a critical ratio is the CPI times the SPI. And as you can imagine, if the goal of CPI and SPI is to be 1 times 1 equals 1. So again, the critical ratio goal is for it to be as close to 1. So you can see in the very first line here, we're at a CPI of 0.77, SPI of 0.52, multiply them together. So our project is behind schedule and we're slightly over cost. So I can see this at a point in time, and now I know I need to start thinking about how do we get this project back on track. So again, very powerful. You don't want as long as you have the elements in place and you're enabling these visible views, then you can just monitor these. There's no action to take to see this kind of value. Now, those are the out-of-the-box versions of EVM that we walk through, and there's certain requirements. Not everyone that uses OpenAir meets the requirements. So you can kind of do your own play on earned value metrics by using custom calculations. So maybe instead of assigned cost, you want to use the project budget feature and use the budgeted hours costs. Maybe you want to stay baselines instead of planned costs. Maybe you want to use bookings. So we talked earlier as bookings being a very common way to be able to manage an overall schedule of a project. Well, if you use bookings instead of assigned hours, then you can recalculate and reproduce a lot of these earned value metrics by using custom calcs, the user costs, and recreating some of these earned values for reporting purposes. So custom calcs become a very powerful option if you're not following the exact out-of-the-box earned value metrics, and you're looking to create similar calculations that are also able to be used and analyzed in the same way. So to summarize today, budget management can be structured basically based on your needs. So simple, complex, somewhere in the middle, a lot of options within OpenAir. Same with schedule management, being able to, you have to have a component of schedule management to be able to derive earned value. And so that'd be within a task structure, within your resource planning, you will be able to get that value out. If you use the out-of-the-box EVM automated feature, you get really powerful metrics. But again, it does require that you use, your project management, project task structure, scheduling inside the project tasks. That all needs to be adhered to and managed for that to become valuable. But if you don't have that option, then there are alternatives to be able to generate those earned value solutions by combining different features and then creating reports and custom calcs that you can throw on dashboards, for getting that, again, getting those views ahead of time. So that's what we had to present today. I hope everyone walked away with some new knowledge. And I'm sure everyone knows who we are and what we do. So if you have any further questions, we're happy to answer those.